This is Javier Hernandez, and I'll be reviewing Dead Poet Society for Leadership in Film. Dead Poet Society is a movie starring Robin Williams that was released in 1989. It's set at a Northeast boarding school named Welton, and the year the movie is set in is 1959, which plays a crucial role in education at the time. Williams plays the role of John Keating, an English teacher, and also a former student of this prestigious boarding school. Now, although Williams' character was an experienced teacher, he was new to the Welton faculty, and so there was some adjustment for him. Now, his teaching methods were different. From day one, he had students, before he even said a word, he's already walking them out of the classroom, and students didn't know what to do, and you could tell this was different for them. He takes them outside, takes them to another wing of the building, and he has them look at old pictures from the school's past, and he delivers a message of carpe diem, seize the day, and from day one he was inspiring students to not waste opportunities, to think for themselves. And so he was challenging them again to think for themselves, but also abandoning prior learning. As you might expect, students resisted his methods initially. Now, this scene here is when he, on a different day, he takes them out of the classroom to have them find their own pace. And he has them, it's an exercise in challenging authority and not conforming to the world. There was one boy that when he invited all students to go ahead, walk around, not really follow anybody else, there was one boy that chose not to walk. And when Keating questioned why he wasn't walking around, he said he was exercising his right to not walk around, to which Keating applauded, and he said, yeah, that's what we're talking about, right? He wanted him to do what he wanted, what he felt was appropriate given the instructions. And so he was really allowing them to be creative. But it didn't end there. As you can see here on the quote, it says, no matter what anybody tells you, words and ideas can change the world. Now, this was a message that he was delivering to them, but I don't know if it really had much meaning to them at the time because they were still getting used to him and getting used to his methods. Now, eventually, he does have them stand on desks, and when he has them stand on the desk, it was a metaphor for seeing the world differently. He wanted them to gain a different perspective, and only by having different perspectives will that generate different ideas. Otherwise, you're just going to recycle what those before you have come up with. Now, in addition to standing on desks and taking them out of the classroom to see old pictures of past classes from the school, he also took them out to a courtyard or a green area, had them kick around a soccer ball. He had them tear out pages in their textbook, and so by doing some of the things that he did, especially the tearing out of pages from their textbook, these actions are dangerous, so there were some risks involved. Now, when you disagree with the textbook author or the actual content of the textbook, in isolated incidents, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you dismiss something that is promoted by the school, that's maybe a staple of that course, well, that's a little different, and definitely the risk was much larger than just simply saying, you know what, I don't know, I disagree with that. But to say, let's tear it out because it's garbage, well, that's going out on a limb. And again, with new students that don't know who you are, word can spread quickly about some of your methods. Now, having a willingness to fail or a willingness to take chances does not come without its risks. And so Williams, he ran the risk of developing a bad reputation, not just among his students, but also among their parents, other faculty members, and the administration, because people do talk what teachers do within their classroom. Now, eventually, the headmaster does come to talk to him because he's heard rumors, and he even witnessed one of the lessons in the courtyard. But I'll explain the confrontation with the headmaster and Mr. Keating on a later slide. Now, in this image, one of the things that Keating was doing was he was modeling. So I already talked about how he had students stand on the desk that's actually behind him. Here he is modeling. So it's one thing to say, I want you to do something, but it's another thing to actually give them the opportunity, okay, and to demonstrate, okay, this is what it could look like, all right, but this is my way of doing it. You know, your way could be different, but this is what I'm talking about. So now at this time, this was very unconventional because what this school, it was more rote learning, I guess, where, you know, it's like, this is the way we're going to do it and this is the way you're going to do it. Where Keating was more about, this is how I do it and you can figure out how you want to do it. Now, all these different methods eventually do pay off. You know, it's like, regardless of what you do from, you know, from day one when you're trying to get to know your students to the point where they're comfortable with you, at some point you do need buy-in from the students for your methods to work. And so these are all examples of buy-in from his students. If we look at the upper right with the students all gathered around, you can see that students are following his every word. And what this tells you is that they're engaged, that he's reached them already, and that they want to be there, they want to learn. And yes, they need to listen to him, but eventually they do understand that they will be allowed to demonstrate that learning in their own way. Now, if you had a contest, you know, like let's say this was an actual teacher and you had a contest where they would have to write the caption, most teachers or most captions would be very positive, as you can see from this image. Now on the upper left, you see now the students are standing on his desk and you can see that there's still some hesitation. They're like, well, what are we doing? Like, I don't know if I'm doing it right? And so he's getting them to understand, all right, you know, this is the first step, you know, just getting out of your comfort zone, but eventually you're going to figure out how you want to do it. Now on the lower left, you see students carrying him off after a victory in a soccer match. You know, this is an example of the adulation that students had for him. Teachers do make an impression on their students, and everything that teachers do matters. And so when we say, you know what, it's just this or that, no. Mr. Keating never treated it that way. He treated every day as the most important day of the school year. Hence his initial message to them, seize the day. And here you see it paying off with the students carrying him off as if he were their leader, right? He was their teacher, not their soccer coach, but he was the best thing they had to a leader, and that's why they loved him so. Now in the lower right, this is an example of students copying something that Keating did when he was a student, which was the Dead Poet Society, but they've made it something their own, right? They got the idea from him, but they didn't keep going to him saying, then what did you do? Then what did you do? What they did is they got the idea and they said, okay, great, now let's do this. And then they did it their own way. And so you see there a student with a saxophone, you see other students smoking, you see students just enjoying themselves and reading poetry at the same time. And so even though the idea came from somebody, they took it to the next level. And so these are all examples of buy-in that students do get from the things they learn from their teachers. Now in a school, we are measured by results, but not all results are the same. And not all results are measured the same way. And so in today's world, and especially in North America with testing at such a focal point in education today, that's one of the measurements. But here you see, that growth is measured in various ways for different students. And this is an example of differentiation because students have individual needs. You have the shy kid, you have the creative kid, you have the discipline issue, you have the highly intellectual student. You need to reach them in different ways, and you need to allow them to express themselves in different ways. And if Mr. Keating had followed the prescribed curriculum, he may not have ever reached some of these students because they would have just done what they were expected to do without questioning much and just, okay, that's going to get me my A or my B or whatever, and move on. And Mr. Keating was above that. He wanted students to learn, he wanted students to express themselves, and he wanted them to be themselves while doing all of that. And so on the left, you have an example of a shy student that wouldn't say much, and a lot of these assignments were outside of his comfort zone. And Mr. Keating, he worked with him, and he got him to produce some results that he could be proud of. And on the right, you have a collection of different students and Mr. Keating from the school, and all of them kind of breaking out of their shells in some way. Now, not everything is great in the movie. There is a conflict between the Headmaster Nolan, and Mr. Keating. Now, Headmaster Nolan, he's more of a traditionalist, where you do things one way, and that's the only way you do things, or you're not going to fit in. And so he has some of his points where he did not like teachers using unorthodox teaching methods, such as the ones Mr. Keating used. When it came to the curriculum, he wanted them to follow set, proven methods because they worked. They were proven to be effective. Students are not to be messed with. It's like they are fragile, they are impressionable, and the things that you teach them is not necessarily what the school wants. He wanted them to teach the curriculum and let later in life deal with that student, with that person. He felt it was dangerous to have high school students think for themselves. This was at a time where they weren't old. He felt they weren't old enough to really think for themselves, that the best thing for them was to tell them what to do. So all of this really adds up to a kind of transactional leadership style where, it's like, do this, this will happen. Do this well, and this will happen. Do this poorly, and this will happen. And in many ways, he was threatening Mr. Keating, saying, if this continues, maybe some changes will need to be made. And so he was really giving Mr. Keating an opportunity to conform. Now, Mr. Keating, he accepted that, or he believed that accepted practices stifled creativity, that teachers needed to be themselves and needed to think outside the box to really reach students, that he wanted students to achieve more, but the current methods did not allow that. And so he challenged the curriculum, and as I mentioned already, he had students tear out pages from the textbook because he disagreed with it. And he also didn't follow the prescribed pacing guide. He bounced around in the textbook. He covered whatever he felt was more important, not what the school said that he should do in which order. So he believed that students should be taught in different ways, not just the one way that would get them an A or B or get them into the college of their choice, but to actually teach the child. And when working with students, he got them to look at things from different perspectives. He got them to challenge and to think creatively and to get more out of their experiences. And so Mr. Keating, to his students, was definitely transformational because he really did change things. He had a vision for where he wanted to go, and he gave students opportunities to get there on their own with his guidance. Now, comparing these two images, you see one of Mr. Keating with Headmaster Nolan, and the other one, then President George W. Bush, signing the No Child Left Behind law. The comparison I want to make is, at the time, things may sound good, but in the end, they play out, and then you form a different opinion. When Headmaster Nolan was telling Keating that the curriculum is proven, it works, that it's set, it's proven, it works. If you walked into a school that had no curriculum and you were asking for a curriculum, teachers would probably accept most things that were, within reason. But if you went to a school that had a curriculum and told teachers that they could not change it, you would have a different issue there because, again, when there is nothing in place, yes, teachers are willing to accept. But when there's something in place, teachers are willing and expect to be able to change and to maneuver within that curriculum. This No Child Left Behind, you see that it had support from both sides of the political aisle. You see, Republican Boehner and Democrat Kennedy, both behind George W. Bush, signing this law. So this is an example of the high hopes that they had for it at the time, but reality has taught us that No Child Left Behind has possibly hurt more than it's helped. And not having actually taught in a school since it was enacted, I don't have my own perspective, only what I've read and heard from other people, but I have not heard many positive reviews of this. Now, what do these two have in common? Well, sometimes it's all about the results for the administrators. Like, just do what you're told and let's get the results. And that's kind of what No Child Left Behind has become. Just do what you're told and let's get the results, which are the higher test scores to get politicians and the public off our backs. And so, this system remains because of the results that people are told they must have, not the creativity and the expression of learning, or the examples of learning that students actually achieve in different ways. And so with, one of the things that Headmaster Nolan told Mr. Keating in this conversation, he said, prepare them for college, the rest will take care of itself, referring to the creativity that students might have someday. He's all like, let the colleges deal with that. We're not here for that. We're here to get them into college, right? Which today is counter to what educators believe. We believe that every grade matters and that we should challenge students and have them think for themselves as much as possible. And so if No Child Left Behind has taught us anything, it's that nothing takes care of itself, that methods do matter. Now, there is difficulty in maintaining your own beliefs in the face of others. Keating, he speaks with the boys after this one student kind of goes a little too far. And so, after the headmaster speaks to him, he speaks to the boys and he says, what, some of the risks you take, you have to think them through, so it's in many ways, it's an acknowledgement by Keating that, what, I'm on a short leash now, and what you do now might reflect on me, possibly, right? And it's much like the way teachers might be stifled by No Child Left Behind or an overbearing administrator that says, no, this is what you're going to do, right? And so that becomes transactional in nature. Now, as far as Mr. Keating, you could argue that he is a transformational leader, but only to his students, and that's a big but, because there was none of this transformational leadership extended to his colleagues. They were conforming to what the school wanted, and there was even one initial conversation early in the movie with one teacher that says, "Oh, like you're going about this all wrong." And Mr. Keating, of course, disagreed. Now, they do form a friendship as the movie goes along, but that's not to say that the other teacher abandoned his education beliefs. And Mr. Keating changing the opinions of parents and administrators, well, that was also non-existent. There was no evidence that any of that occurred. In fact, you can say that Mr. Keating failed in their eyes. Now, they used him, parents, admin, and even some students used him as a scapegoat when one of the other students committed suicide because of his, well, I'm not going to say because, he was not happy with the life that his father had chosen for him and was trying to dictate for him. And he eventually does commit suicide, and so there was the backlash. and no one really stood up for Mr. Keating, realizing that the culture was not going to support having this teacher around. And so when we look at the teacher leader model standards, there might be an argument that accessing and using research to improve practice and student learning was in the movie. However, not a strong example of it. It's like Mr. Keating was basically a lone wolf. He didn't have much support. When you look at the other domains, such as domain 3, 6, and 7, all of these, there is no evidence of any collaboration, of any professional learning, any advocating for the profession or student learning. It was do what you're told, do what you're expected to do, and everything will work out. And so, if a new teacher or any teacher were to go to a school like this today, I think they would be very unhappy just having to follow a prescribed curriculum and teaching methods, and going outside of that would be frowned upon. And so Mr. Keating, he was not satisfied with traditional education. He was challenging it every step of the way. And, change isn't necessary, but it can be positive, in many ways. And we saw examples of that with his students by having them think for themselves. Now, when he appealed to their ideals, it's like we don't always want to do what students want, but there is some acceptance or some accepted methods. And when you see the work that's produced by students, then I think you gain more support for those methods. And in today's world, if we saw similar things, we would applaud teachers like that. One of the reasons was he used authentic means. He didn't just have them write all the time, have them stay in a classroom all the time. He was different, and he got students to believe that things could be different, and eventually they did buy into it. And so you could definitely argue that he stimulated them intellectually and for the better. He wasn't about creating rogue students, but he was about, stimulating their intellectual abilities and creativity. And so in the end, we can say that the moral of the story is, if you're a new teacher, it's like carpe diem, seize the day. When we say make your lives extraordinary, I'm not thinking about students, I'm thinking about teachers. It's like, make your lives extraordinary. As teachers, you have a big impact on students. It's like our job is to challenge students, but also at the same time, do not ignore the culture, right? Mr. Keating ignored the culture of the school, and that might have led to his downfall. Anywhere you are, especially for international educators, being in tune with the culture of the school is important. And just like our textbook says, culture is everything, right? So it should not be ignored. Now, there is a difference between inspirational and rogue, and you can say that there's evidence of both for Mr. Keating. Know which one you are, and again, the culture and collaboration with colleagues, a lot of this will guide you. Now, for new teachers, my advice is, based on the movie, is do better than the way you were taught, and I think a lot of new teachers, they're so anxious when they first start. They go back and they say, well, this is the way I was taught, and I'm gonna just go with this because it's safe. But by the time you become a teacher, methods change and practices change. So it's good to collaborate, because you'll see what teachers are doing. Visit other classrooms, right? Try to work within the system, but be an advocate for improvement. And so carpe diem, teachers matter, so do not waste time, not even one day.